Alright guys, so over the last couple of days, Israel has been significantly ramping up their brutal offensive inside of Rafah, which is the southernmost tip of the Gaza Strip, right there near the border with Egypt, which, just as a reminder for everybody, is the place that Israel previously told people to go to for safety. And so now we're sort of continuing with this genocidal game of musical chairs, where they're telling them, okay, now Rafah isn't safe, you need to go somewhere else, you need to go to Al-Mawasi and walk through the rubble and the unexploded ordinances and continuous airstrikes and sniper fire, etc., to go to a completely different place that now apparently we're calling a safe zone. Now, this latest story that we got from yesterday seems like they struck one of the places that they actually told people to flee to from Rafah. Right? So a different portion of Rafah that they told them was going to be a safe zone. So here from Reuters, Israeli attack on Rafah tent camp kills 45 and prompts international outcry. So we'll read some of the details here from this in a second. I just want to give you guys a short picture into the absolute hell on earth that this place looked like just last night. So I'm not going to actually play the video because there's a lot of stuff that would get, completely taken off of YouTube. But this is what it looked like when some of the tent camps had been lit on fire due to some of these strikes from the IDF. And you can see some people trying to go and pick up some of the people who had been, casualties of these strikes. And you see the raging fire taking place in the background. I mean, this is essentially a giant refugee camp that they're bombing here, right? Of people who were displaced by them already previously. And now we also have another testimony here from one of the survivors of this massacre. He says, I lost 5 family members. We were sitting in tents when suddenly the camp was bombed. I lost 5 family members, all burned completely. Among the victims were pregnant women. They kept telling us that this area was safe until we were bombed. And so one final thing here before we continue with the details. Another testimony here. The airstrikes burnt the tents. The tents are melting, and the people's bodies are also melting. I mean, listen, some of this stuff I almost feel like I shouldn't be saying because it's just so beyond grotesque and horrible that we are allowing this to continue to happen. But this is reality. This is what Israel is continuing to do with the full backing of my government, the United States of America. There's no low that we can't possibly stoop to in this genocide. Now, some of the details from everything that just unfolded over the last couple of days. They say here, an Israeli airstrike triggered a fire that killed 45 people in a tent camp in the Gazan city of Rafah, officials said on Monday, prompting an outcry from global leaders who urged the implementation of a world court order to halt Israel's assault. And just as a reminder, I covered that video a couple days ago, or I covered that story a couple days ago in my video of the International Court of Justice coming out with another ruling, which Israel had already been violating their preliminary rulings that came out a few months ago, but they implemented this ruling for Israel that they must halt their offensive inside of Rafah. And of course, Israel is completely ignoring that. They don't give 2 shits about international law in the same way that the United States doesn't give 2 shits about international law. So of course, they're going to completely ignore it. But as a further reminder, the ICJ rulings are legally binding for any member state of the United Nations. It's not the same as the International Criminal Court, where those arrest warrants are coming down for Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant. For that, you have to actually rely on people who are, or countries that are signatories to the ICC to then make the decision that if Benjamin Netanyahu travels to their country, once the warrants are issued, that they will make those arrests. This is actually different. And so what we could potentially see in the coming days or weeks is we could have a member of the United Nations Security Council that is going to bring a resolution that is trying to pressure Israel to fall in line with the ICJ's ruling to halt their invasion of Rafah. And then the United States and the Biden administration will be put in an incredibly awkward position where they're likely going to veto a resolution that is essentially calling for Israel to abide what Joe Biden said was his previous red line. Right? Joe Biden said that going into Rafah in a major way was one of his red lines. And now we get further escalations in Rafah and that potential United Nations Security Council resolution coming down the pipeline. So, I mean, the humiliation for Joe Biden in this moment could not get more severe. But they continue here with some details saying that Israel's military, and this is a remarkable line here from Reuters, which is trying to eliminate Hamas in Gaza, said that it was investigating reports that a strike it carried out against commanders of the Islamic militant group in Rafah had caused the fire, and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the strike had not been intended to cause civilian casualties. So then what exactly was it intended to do? You just, multiple times it looks like, struck a refugee camp where people were taking refuge inside of camps, and you're alleging that maybe you got a few Hamas guys in there, but the overwhelming majority were just random civilians. So again, either you are the most incompetent military on the face of the planet, or you're just lying, and you actually don't care when you go out and do these kinds of massacres of innocent men, women, and children. And I think we know which one is closer to reality in this situation. But I mean, again, just an amazing line here from Reuters, and I'll get to more media failures here in a bit. But Israel's military, which is trying to eliminate Hamas, really, because it looks like based on what they're doing on the ground, where a vast majority of the people they're killing are innocent civilians, it looks like maybe this isn't a targeted war to eliminate Hamas. And we've covered that previous reporting from Politico that came out a few days ago, showing that they've only taken out like 30 to 35% of Hamas's fighting capabilities. A majority of the tunnels that Hamas uses are still intact. So you're not really succeeding by any metric in eliminating Hamas, but you are succeeding in continuing to do these kinds of, mass casualties of civilians inside of Gaza. You're doing really well at that. Now they continue. They say survivors of the families were preparing to sleep when the strike hit the Tel al-Sultan neighborhood, where thousands were sheltering after Israeli forces began their ground offensive in the east of Rafah over the 2 weeks ago. So I'll show you guys the map of where exactly the strike took place. This was more in western Rafah, which is where they told them to go, right? As they were beginning their invasion in the eastern portion of Rafah. And they got a quote here from one of these survivors. They say, "We were praying and we were getting our children's beds ready to sleep. There was nothing unusual. Then we heard a very loud noise and fire erupted around us." They continue, "All of the screams, all of the children started screaming. The sound was terrifying. We felt like the metal was about to collapse on us and shrapnel fell into the rooms." I mean, just an absolute nightmare. Of course, they say that more than half of the dead were women, children, and elderly people, health officials in the Hamas-run Gaza Ministry of Health said, adding that the death toll was likely to rise from people with severe burns. So this 45 casualty number may actually go up in the next couple of days. And we'll finish off with this here. They say, the U.S. urged Israel to take more care to protect civilians, but stopped short of calling for a halt to the Rafah incursion. Here's the quote. "Israel has a right to go after Hamas, and we understand that this strike killed 2 senior Hamas terrorists who are responsible for attacks against Israeli civilians," a National Security Council spokesperson said. "But as we've been clear, Israel must take every precaution possible to protect civilians." Okay, first off, they're clearly not doing that. They're clearly not doing that. And so then what? What do you do then? What do you have to say after you figured out months ago that they're not doing everything that they can to protect civilians? In fact, they're doing the opposite of that, right? But I also want to get into this because Israel has a right to go after Hamas, and we understand that this strike apparently killed a couple of Hamas terrorists who are responsible for killing Israeli civilians. So let's just break down the logic here. First off, we don't know that this strike actually killed any Hamas militants, let alone senior Hamas officials. That's what Israel is claiming. We don't have any evidence for that as of right now. But even just the underlying logic here, that these Hamas militants killed Israeli civilians, and killing civilians is wrong, right? That's the logic we're going with here, right? Killing Israeli civilians is wrong. Therefore, we are justified in killing dozens of Palestinian civilians to take out those Hamas guys as sort of revenge or accountability. Does this sound like justice? In what moral world does this make sense? Well, we have to go after the bad guys because they killed civilians, therefore we're going to kill a bunch of civilians to go after the bad guys. In what world does that make sense? Unless you view Palestinian life as less valuable than Israeli life. That's the only world in which this kind of a statement makes any sense. Now we have some split here from France and Germany. So French President Emmanuel Macron said that he was outraged over Israel's latest attack, saying these operations must stop. There are no safe areas in Rafah for Palestinian civilians. He's 100% correct. So where the fuck is Joe Biden right now? I mean, you're getting outflanked by Emmanuel Macron. That's pretty embarrassing. We also have German foreign minister here and the EU foreign policy chief saying that the International Court of Justice ruling must be respected. So Israel is in total violation of international law, obviously, but they're now also, on top of that, in violation of the International Court of Justice's ruling that they have to stop their invasion of Rafah, right? I don't think this is going to help you in your genocide case, right? You're ignoring the ruling to stop your invasion of Rafah, and then you're going into Rafah and massacring dozens of civilians. Not exactly going to, bolster your case at the ICJ. Now, in terms of where this strike actually took place, here we have a couple of maps. So this is all over the place because in the wake of this strike, and when the footage started coming out, we started getting information about the casualties of civilians, of innocent men, women, and children. the Israeli government was panicking, okay? And they were trying to come up with some sort of a justification, some sort of a deflection, some sort of a story that wouldn't make them look so barbaric. And so here we start off with this. 4 days ago, the IDF told Palestinians in Rafah to move to an area that it calls Block 2371 and designated as a safe area. This is the area that Israel just bombed refugee tents, carrying out a massacre. So this is the area 2371. They've split Gaza up into a bunch of different zones and they've numbered them, right? So this is the area 2371. This is a previous statement that was released by Israel, including information on telling people where to go to be in safe zones. You'll notice here at the top, 2371. So this was on the list that they released of where they were telling people to go to be in a safe zone. Then we get this statement from the IDF directly saying, last night, the Israeli Air Force carried out an intelligence-based precise strike that targeted senior Hamas terrorists in Tal al-Sultan. So first off, this is what you consider to be a precise strike? Even if we assume that you're correct, that you did take out 2 Hamas guys, you killed 45 people. Is that a precise strike? Is this what you consider to be precise? I mean, it does track with previous reporting that I've shown you guys, like on the use of AI inside of Gaza, where they basically said that their standards are that for a low-ranking Hamas militant, it's acceptable to kill up to 20 to 25 innocent civilians in those strikes as collateral damage. And if it's a high-ranking militant, they think it's acceptable to kill upwards of 100 innocent civilians to go after them. So, I mean, it fits in within the boundaries of what they've previously stated is their acceptable threshold. It certainly doesn't line up with what international law's threshold of proportionality would indicate, but I guess that does line up. They say, contrary to Hamas's lies and misinformation, the strike did not take place in the Al-Mawasi humanitarian area. This is the area where the strike actually happened. So this is where it gets kind of confusing and convoluted because, first off, nobody was saying that it happened in Al-Mawasi. That was never the claim. People knew that this was the location where it took place. So why are you saying that it didn't take place in Al-Mawasi as sort of like a gotcha to try to get back at people, to say they're spreading misinformation? Nobody was claiming that the strike took place in Al-Mawasi, right? But I guess they're trying to say it was outside of the region that we had highlighted and told people to go to. But again, that doesn't line up with the official numbers that you released. This strike took place in 2371 in that zone, and that was included in what you guys designated was a safe zone. Now it gets even worse. It gets more complicated here because you'll notice the bottom tweet here from Barak Ravid, tweeted 4 hours ago. He said, breaking, Netanyahu says that an airstrike on the airstrike in Rafah on Sunday was a tragic mistake, and then adds that it will be investigated. Okay, first off, yeah, I'm sure it's going to be investigated like every other war crime that has been investigated over the last 6 or 7 months. I mean, completely ridiculous, but he says it's a tragic mistake. So which one is it? I mean, you have the IDF coming out and tweeting, last night we carried out an intelligence-based precise strike that targeted a senior Hamas terrorist. So which one is it? Was it a precise strike that happened exactly as you wanted it to and you got the 2 bad guys that you were going after? Or was it a tragic mistake? Which one was it? I mean, you have 2 competing statements here from the Israeli military versus the Israeli prime minister. I mean, it's obvious that they are just desperately scrambling to try to figure out some sort of a justification for the unjustifiable, right? Now, we had a good response here from Rashida Tlaib. She said this was intentional. You don't accidentally kill massive amounts of children and their families over and over again and get to say that it was a mistake. Genocidal maniac Netanyahu, credit to her for using this kind of accurate phrasing here, told us that he wants to ethnically cleanse Palestinians. True. When are you going to believe him? And she's 100% right. And this is something that has been consistently frustrating for me in covering these stories, is it's like the mainstream media, they don't even have, and our politicians as well, they don't have conversations where the center of it is what these leaders in Israel have actually been saying since the beginning of this, right? We've had so many openly genocidal statements, whether it's the Amalek statement, or there are no innocent civilians in Gaza, or we're going to do a complete siege and cut off the food, the fuel, the water, and do collective punishment. All of these statements were openly genocidal. They said what they were going to do, and then they did that. But here we're living in like an alternate universe in the United States where our mainstream press and our political class are just like unaware of those statements, right? We have to have these mysterious conversations about, well, what is Israel's goal in Gaza? And are they committing war crimes? I don't know. Is that anti-Semitic to say that they're doing bad things at all? I mean, that's the kind of conversation we're having here in the US. But she's 100% correct, right? This is what they said they were going to do. And now they're doing it, right? And again, you don't get to kill over and over and over again, massive amounts of civilians, and then just be like, oops, sorry, for the 500th time in the last 6-7 months, we targeted a bunch of civilians and wiped them out. Oops, sorry, another mistake. I mean, it's ridiculous that anyone would believe that for a second, right? Now, we had a White House National Security Council spokesperson who elaborated. This is, additionally on top of the one we just read. He said, the devastating images following the IDF strike in Rafah last night that killed dozens of innocent Palestinians are heartbreaking. Israel has a right to go after Hamas, but as we've been clear, Israel must take every precaution possible to protect civilians. We are actively engaging the IDF and partners on the ground to assess what's happened. I mean, again, the IDF, the Israeli government, are the least credible sources on the face of the planet. Okay, that's just a fact. They've demonstrably proven themselves over and over again to be pathological liars. Okay, so the idea that you are going to work with them to try to come up with an explanation, what you're doing is you're working with them to come up with an excuse. That's what you're working for, right? You're working to come up with an explanation that does not implicate Israel in any war crimes or even allegations of war crimes, because if they are, then the continued, endless shipment of weapons that we are giving them are totally illegal under U.S. law and under international law, by the way, but also under U.S. law through things like the Leahy law. And so we have to go through this bullshit runaround where we see brazen war crimes committed over and over and over again on a daily basis. And then it's, it's a tragedy, it's heartbreaking, they need to do more to care about civilians, and I guess there will be an investigation that never materializes in any way, shape, or form. It's the same playbook over and over and over again. Now, the media, of course, again, just to give you guys an insight in terms of how they are framing a lot of this conversation here on the BBC, they framed it as a deadly incident, an incident that is being investigated by Israel's defense forces. And then the presenter, who's talking to this reporter on the live shot, says, we wait to hear the results of that investigation. So, I mean, the translation here from Ali is 100% correct. We wait for instructions from the killers about what to say happened. That's what you're doing here. You don't wait for the IDF to investigate something and then just regurgitate whatever propaganda they come up with. They're going to lie. Of course they are. They've done this over and over again. I mean, they've literally put out edited videos, like with the strike that, or the attack that happened on the people who were desperately going and trying to seek aid during the Flower Massacre, as it was since dubbed. They put out an edited video where they specifically cut out the portions of it where they were shooting at the civilians, right? This is not a source that can be trusted, okay? And any media outlet, any reporter, any journalist who takes anything that they say at face value is not a journalist. You're just a stenographer, and you're aiding and abetting at this point in helping to perpetuate a genocide. There's no explanation for this. There is no investigation that's going to happen that's going to turn up evidence that, oops, all of these 45 people that we just killed were actually secretly Hamas militants. That's not going to happen. This is a war crime, okay? I don't know how much more clear we could possibly get. Now, it's gotten to the point now, guys, where even Piers Morgan is making definitive statements. My biggest issue with Piers Morgan is always that when it comes to Hamas, it's very easy for him to criticize them. They're genocidal monsters, they're terrorists, etc., etc. But then when it comes to Israel, usually he's very waffly about it. And he'll say, oh, well, I don't agree with everything that they do. I'm not a fan of Netanyahu, but they're defending themselves, etc., etc. They haven't committed any war crimes. But they've even lost Piers Morgan at this point, guys. He said, the scenes from Rafah overnight are horrific. I've defended Israel's right to defend itself after October 7th, but slaughtering so many innocent people as they cower in a refugee camp is indefensible. Stop this now, Netanyahu. This is by far the strongest statement that I've heard from Piers Morgan. And the reason I bring this up isn't because I value anything that Piers Morgan has to say on any issue whatsoever, but it's just to get across the point that, like, even people who have been some of the strongest defenders of Israel's genocide in Gaza are starting to turn. I've seen it from other accounts that I follow as well, who are usually very, reactionary in their defense of everything that Israel does and trying to come up with justifications for it and saying that, the student protesters are all, anti-Semitic for protesting this genocide and whatever. And even some of those accounts are now saying that this is indefensible. So, I mean, maybe this is a turning point. 7 months into a genocide, I don't know what more it could have possibly taken, but maybe this is it for some of these guys. Now, we also had a report here from Amnesty International that I'll link down below. It actually just dropped today, and it came across my timeline. I read through it. And so they're talking about, here's the headline, Israeli airstrikes that killed 44 civilians, further evidence of war crimes, according to this new investigation that they put out. Now, to save time on the video, I won't go through some of the important parts that I highlighted, but this is actually a report talking about 3 different strikes, not the one from last night. 3 different strikes where they basically did the exact same thing as what they did last night. So the reason I bring this up, and again, link will be down in the description. I recommend you guys go and read this report. The reason I bring it up is because this is nothing new. Like, okay, peers, I'm glad that you're finally starting to turn around maybe on this, but like, these are the kinds of strikes that they have been doing for 7 months straight. Okay, this isn't anything new. If anything, I mean, this isn't even close to the worst of the strikes that I've seen over the last 6 or 7 months. So I don't know what makes it, different this time around for some of these people, but again, hopefully this does change some people's minds. But again, it's nothing new. This is par for the course for what Israel has been doing. Now, we also had further protests that have been taking place everywhere. It seems like that Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, goes. Here we have a crowd of people, blood on their hands, saying, "War criminal, shame on you, Secretary of Genocide." And I show you guys this to, commend these protesters, but also to say, like, this is how it has to be for the rest of his life, for the rest of Antony Blinken's life, Joe Biden's life. Everybody who is aided and abetted in this should not know a moment of silence, a moment of peace in the rest of their life. I'm not saying anybody should attack them, but doing stuff like this is necessary. Okay, this is good work that these people are doing, because he's completely, all in on this genocide. He's been putting in overtime trying to justify this, trying to get more weapons to Israel. And so, of course, you shouldn't just be able to go about your day as if nothing is happening. Something is happening, right? Now, I'll finish off with just a couple more things here, because some of the media coverage that I've seen over the last couple of days has gotten just to an incalculably, new low, even for some of these outlets. I mean, this was from the Atlantic. This is a real sentence they chose to publish. Now, I don't know if this was in the op-ed section or if this was something else, but here's the sentence. "It is possible to kill children legally." Now, already, there's an extension on that sentence. You guys can read it if you want. I don't even need to read the rest of the sentence, guys. Anytime that you have mainstream outlets, that you have any sort of broad coalition of people within positions of power who start to say things like, it's possible to legally kill children, then you've already gone so far beyond what should be acceptable discourse that it's alarming to think about what could potentially be coming down the pipeline. It is legal to kill children in some circumstances. I mean, even if you want to get to the technicalities, sure, in some circumstances it might be. I could conjure up a situation where it's an emergency situation and there's some, a rocket that's about to be fired at civilians, and you're going to take out 10 Hamas guys, and there's a child who's in the way, and sometimes you have to do what you have to do. First off, that's not what we've been seeing happen inside of Gaza. But also, it's just having this conversation. Really, this is where we're at. We're now trying to come up with justifications on technicalities for how Israel can get away with massacring children. This is the new low that we've stooped to. Now, somebody else pointed out that the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic is a former Israeli prison guard. I mean, you can't make this shit up. A former Israeli prison guard. It's just amazing. Now, finishing off with this, the Gaza aid port that was always a nightmare idea from the beginning, and basically the functionality of it collapsed within days of it finishing construction, and there's been not even a trickle at this point of aid coming through this port, but even in a hypothetical best case scenario, it would not have been able to facilitate the amount of aid that needs to get into Gaza. That has to come over the land crossings that Israel is blocking, so it was already a failure before it even began, and then it was a failure after it began, and now it's even more of a failure. So I mean, you have like pontoon vehicles, or vehicles, I guess, that are part of this floating pier that are now washing up on shore. Washing up on shore. This is how much of a failure this pier has been. Not only has the aid not been getting to where they've been intending for it to go, not only is the aid not nearly enough for what's needed in Gaza, but then you also have fucking US ships that are washing up on the shores of Gaza. What are we doing, guys? I mean, this is just humiliating at this point. And at the same time that this is happening, again, because Israel has shut off the land crossings, you now have truck drivers who are sitting on the border with Gaza, and their food is rotting away. The food is getting spoiled. I mean, they're being put there and trapped there for weeks and weeks and weeks on end, not allowed to enter, not allowed to deliver the aid. So I mean, again, guys, I mean, all of this is sort of like part and parcel of the same stuff that I've been covering over the last couple of months. This latest strike seems to be particularly horrific. It looks like the death toll is likely to get above 50 in the next couple of days. And I don't know. I mean, maybe this is one of those events that causes some people to shift on this issue. But in terms of the Biden administration, it doesn't look like it. They're coming up with justifications. They're looking to do some sort of I guess, like bullshit assessment with the IDF to figure out what happened here. And I'm sure that they'll come back with a full, transparent, and honest report on that. Yeah, I mean, this nightmare just continues on a daily basis. I mean, they're continuing with their invasion of Rafah. They're continuing to displace hundreds of thousands of people. They've been bombing mosques and churches and schools and UN shelters and refugee camps and hospitals and the rest of it. And we're just supposed to believe what? This is a war against Hamas? Guys, Hamas before October 7th only had about like 30 to 40,000 people in their ranks. There are 2 million people in Gaza. They've destroyed the entire hospital system, the entire education system. They've destroyed a majority of the housing in Gaza, displaced basically the entire population at this point, and now there's a full-blown famine in the north. We're supposed to believe, with that set of statistics, that this is a targeted war against Hamas. Who the fuck is gullible enough to believe that?
Politic guy has the best politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying